Thank you very much. I'm neither an Egyptologist nor a conservator, so I'm here because about 22 years ago I wanted to demonstrate that new technologies could actually Is that better? Okay, sorry. So about 20 years ago, I wanted to demonstrate that new technologies could transform how we understand, look after, share, and disseminate our cultural heritage. And before I begin, the list of people over that time who I need to thank is obviously vast. I'm going to focus the talk on the work in Tutankhamun, but I'll actually begin talking about Seti I. So when I first came here, it was really thanks to Dr. Gabala Gabala and Cambridge University. While I was working here, I owe so much to Dr. Zahir Was. I owe a lot to Mustafa Waziri. And over the years, we've set out to try to completely transfer the technologies to local Egyptian teams. And for me, this is really at the core of what we've done, and I hope you'll see that as I go through. But following on from the last talk, I really hope we can see that non-contact preservation, non-contact documentation is working with conservation, with treatments, to try and find sustainable ways that don't impose things upon the tomb which people will regret in the future. So it's how you sustain, how you preserve. That's not my talk. Sorry. 1 minute. Start looking at the screen. Okay. So the talk looks at time. 100 years ago, well, just under, this is 99 years, as you can see from the picture, this is in 23. The entrance to the tomb looked like this. And Tutmania meant from the early days that Carter observed how difficult it was going to be to preserve a tomb that had been built to last for eternity, but never to be visited. When I started working in Tutankhamun's tomb in 2009, as you've just seen, the photographs were quite extreme. The queues outside and the number of people inside over long days were, certainly at the maximum of what I think could be sustained. But the real question is, we know how fast the world's changing. We know COP. We know all the problems that are going on at the moment. So what's the environment going to look like in 100 years' time? So what are we doing now? How can we pass on sustainable knowledge, data in new forms to the future? The beginning of Factum Foundation, so I actually had an idea in 2001 that we could, I'd been working in Madrid and was working very closely with the people involved in the replica of Altamira. I wasn't actually involved in that, but I was following very closely what they were doing. And the media, the public information said that this was the state-of-the-art recording. The truth was, in Altamira, they were working from early photogrammetric data, and they probably had about one measured point every 5 centimeters, something like this. So you had about 800 points per square meter. And with my partner, who I formed Factum Foundation with, Manuel Franquelo, who's an engineer, we knew it was possible to record 100 million measured points per square meter. So individually measured points. So the conversation began, could we build a system? So we looked around, there weren't any readily available systems that could do that. So we modified a system. We worked with a company called 3D Scanners UK, who had a 2-camera, 1-laser scanner. We modified how it worked, and the big tower carries the small scanner and it moves it across the surface. So the first goal was to say, could we capture the data in the tomb? Could we process that data? So three-dimensional color, all non-contact, 100% without touching the wall at all. Could we process that data? Could we take it back to Madrid? And could we then demonstrate how close it was to the original by rematerializing it? So in 2001, we tested a number of different systems. So on the right of this picture is a handheld scanner that was called a model maker at the time. In 2001, it was the state-of-the-art industry scanner. We used a whole range, as I said, of different scanning techniques, but it was really the two-camera, one laser scanner that became the main tool that was able to get the resolution we needed. And I'm going to try and get through resolution very quickly, because over 21 years, it's something I've failed to communicate, and I failed to get it clearly addressed. But before I do that, in 2001, there were no Egyptian members of the team. There were the inspectors, there were the people from the ministry who made it possible for us to work. But there was no one in the team who was Egyptian. Now, this is what the team looks like. So the Theban Necropolis Preservation Initiative is run by Ali Ishmael, who's here, and Abdou Gaba's here too. And it's an entirely Egyptian team who've been trained and carried out the complete, or the second phase of the recording of Seti I. So they're working very closely with the technicians from Madrid who come backwards and forwards. But really the goal, and I hope most of you got to see the replica yesterday at Carter House, so it's behind Carter House. And if you haven't, I'd love you to go and see it, preferably on the same visit as going to see the original, so you can actually see that the two things are extraordinarily similar. And it's that similarity that we strive to capture. So the recording system did record 100 million measured points per square meter. That's not averaging them, that's not optimizing them, that's not making them up. That's actual measured points. And the data that we recorded in 2001 has still very seldom been matched by anybody else. Factum is now running a big project with the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and we've just gone through quite a major jump. It was actually a research project that also began in collaboration with Carleton University. So I used to have Carleton students coming to Madrid to work with my team to develop the technology. So developing the technology, writing the software, working on the processing, working very often on the output technologies is all part of what we've transferred. So LiDAR scanning, which many people consider to be high resolution, is a wonderful tool. We use it a lot, but it measures spaces. So you could capture this room in a matter of hours. Normally people say, Adam, that's not a fair comparison because you're talking about long-range scanning as opposed to close-range scanning. But on the left is the maximum data you can record under optimum conditions from the closest working range with a LiDAR. And on the right is the data that we record with the Lucida scanner. So if I do it quickly, that's an image of a section of the wall going down. This is what corridor G, going down. And actually I'll come to it in a minute, but it's an area where two doorposts have been cut off. The high resolution, or what we call medium resolution photogrammetry, which is what many refer to as high resolution, looks like this. The highest resolution photogrammetry done by very skilled operators looks like this. And the Lucida data looks like this. Okay. Now, for me, is this important? Yes. Okay. This allows you to study the walls, the surface of the walls. So actually, these are renders. This is an image of three-dimensional data. We are also recording the color. I'll come to that in a minute. So it's very complementary to the work that Getty's carried out. And we did the work in 2009 because Mustafa Waziri saw what we were doing and with Zahi, who asked us to carry out. I'd actually come to carry on the work in SETI, but there was a lot of excavation work going on that Dr. Hawass talked about in the tunnel. So we were redirected to record in Tutankhamun. But before I get to Tutankhamun, with SETI, it's a fascinating tomb. I'm not an Egyptologist. It's a profoundly significant tomb with vast amounts of data that work on many levels and contain knowledge that I believe is essential to record as well as possible. When Belzoni discovered it, he records it as being in near perfect condition. A few years later, he left it in terrible condition after squeezing. And in this image, you can see a big area of the wall cut out. That was cut out by Champollion, who carried it to Paris. We've been working with all the museums around the world who have sections and fragments from SETI to record that data, to bring it back and make it more complete. And I'm not going to talk about it now, but one of the exhibitions we're preparing for the Grand Egyptian Museum is a complete recreation of the Hall of Beauties using the drawings and watercolors by Belzoni and Ricci to add to the data that we can reconstruct from our three-dimensional recording. So, scanning in the Louvre, this is an image of the fragment he cut out. It's a big fragment. It's about 2 meters 60 high by about 1 meter 10 wide. And in color, it looks like that. Personally, I'm fascinated by the biography of objects, by how they change over time, by how they reflect the values of the people who look after them. And in this case, this was restored sometime in the 90s, and it has a sort of pastel, slightly chiffon, transparent feeling. It actually doesn't look terribly much like the rest of the tomb, and it looks even less like the fragment that's in the Archaeological Museum in Florence that was restored in the 1930s, about 1936, and it feels much more Mussolini than it does SETI. And I think these facts are important, because when we're looking at objects, we often don't know how to read them. So, Tutankhamun, very fast, because I promised Dr. Zahi that we'd be finished on the dot at 5, and I know this can go on for quite a long time, so I will get to 5. But we brought crate loads of material. This is about a third of it, that had all been designed and built in Factum or modified with different manufacturers. The core of it is the Lucida laser scanner, the system that has been built and modified in Factum over the last 21 years. And it's a laser strip like a barcode reader that moves along the surface with 2 cameras recording the data either side. We really developed this for work in SETI, and to some degree the undulations on the walls of Tutankhamun and actually the relief, the small relief on the microbacteria come out beautifully when recorded with this system. But we felt that a white light scanning system could be a good way to support what we were doing. So the projected light, so this scanner is more photographic, it projects light onto a surface and it calculates the nature of the surface from the deformation on theoretically straight lines or patterns. That's coupled with the high-resolution photographic data. And here we developed, we've come a long way since 2009 on the photographic recording. Interestingly, the large-scale 3D recording hasn't actually improved that much, except recently on as I mentioned, with the Bodleian. But here we're recording with a planar system, moving the camera in front of the wall, and with 2 lights and a camera. We're recording true data, 1-to-1, at around 600 dpi. So you could actually enlarge it 3, 4, 5 times without any breakdown in the data at all. And very important, just like Ligeti's work, and I totally agree with what was said just now. Looking can't be replaced. So however technological you might be, you still need to look and think and talk and share ideas while you're working. And the systems that we were using at that time to give us true color notations, in addition to the normal color checkers and color charts. So we were interested in the very subtle differences. Then back in Madrid, you have the color data and the surface data. And very interestingly, with the new computer gaming software, Unreal Engine 5, this fact that we're recording data separately, relief and color, gives us enormous advantages in terms of creating the kind of virtual reality or the different forms of display that you can do with the data. I mean, I think what you can do with this data is becoming very exciting, and that's where I want to end up. But we process all the data. This is very time-consuming and very focused. We built the printer to print the color. We worked on the system to actually make the surface. And I think this image is one of my favorites, because at the bottom half you can see the skin of color that we print fixed in perfect register over the surface of the slightly granular wall. And at the top part of the picture you can see a skin before it's stuck down. I should say at this point that the original dream was that we could transfer not only the recording, the input technology, to an Egyptian team, but that we could also create a visitor center by Carter House where you could make the facsimiles. So the actual way of processing and recreating the data could be done here as well, and could be part of the visitor experience. I mean, in my talk, I started saying it's about sustainable tourism and sustainable preservation. I think getting visitors to understand that they can be part of the solution, not just part of the problem, is a really important part of the work we're trying to push. I mean, we completed the tomb in 2011, the facsimile of Tutankhamun, but again, because of the problems, it wasn't delivered to Egypt and given to Egypt until 2012, when it was given by the European Union to the government at the time. It then got stored in Cairo for 2 years before a site was chosen just behind Carter House. And we set about, with Tariq Wali, the Egyptian architect, designing a building that is exactly the same in its footprint, but very different in its construction method to the original tomb. And the facsimile was installed. Its entrance looks as it does in the bottom here. It started off looking at the top, and when you go inside, it looks exactly as the tomb did in 2009 when we recorded it. And Salima, am I allowed to say this? One of my favorite moments since I've been working here. Actually, I have two. One was watching Salima Ikram in the hotel we were staying in, looking at the data in 2001 and getting very excited. And then watching Salima's reaction walking into the facsimile of Tutankhamun's tomb. And I still get an emotional reaction every time I walk into it. And it's a mixture of all the people, all the technology, all the time spent bringing it and making it. So, I mean, comparing Harry Burton's amazing photographs, the documentation of the best kind done in the 20s, with the images that we're putting together now. Now, what happened there? 1 minute. So, what's going on now is that we then, working with the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities carried out the complete restoration. I said we never touch objects, but in this case, the Hassan Fatih building was slipping off the top of the scarp slope, and with Tariq Wali again, his practice did the work with an Egyptian team to turn Hassan Fatih's Stopla House into the recording centre where the Theban Necropolis Preservation Initiative team is working now. The restoration, I think, is beautiful, and again was done by an entirely Egyptian team. So I hope this will have a long life and will go on growing as the projects that are being carried out here continue to grow. So the team, as I mentioned, is entirely Egyptian. They have 4 scanning systems. Maybe there's 3 working at the moment. There's one that needs a bit of attention. So maintaining the equipment, modifying the software, keeping it working is all critical to what we're doing. And I think the recording that they carried out in SETI, which was finished at the beginning of this year, the data is now being processed. And what we're doing in SETI is bringing all the fragments, all the watercolours, all the data into a digital form. I'm just about to get on to the digital form, but we're not just working here with the ministry. We're also working in Cairo, and Osama Dawud who's here, who's been demonstrating the virtual reality, is here recording Iqbal Yusuf near the Citadel in Cairo for ARSI. So for me, it's these collaborations where we must all work together to push in the same direction to make sure we do amazing things. We're starting to instigate training courses beyond just the team of the ministry and our group. But to conclude and to wind up and to try and imagine where this dream could go, we're now working with the American Embassy in Cairo, who have been extraordinarily responsive. I mean, so what I most love is when people see a possibility, see an opportunity, and then take it, perhaps in a way that hadn't existed before. A new local economy based on sustainable preservation, based on sharing, based on different methods of giving people access to this data, to disseminating it, to spreading it worldwide so people understand that the task of preserving, the task of long-term preservation is unbelievably difficult. And for me, that's the challenge. It's to make sure that we work together in collaborative ways, not being stopped by the normal obstacles. So right at the beginning, if we hadn't decided to build the scanner that we've gone on modifying, we wouldn't be here now, we wouldn't be doing these things. And I'm incredibly proud that the scanners are here and they're working. So what we really want is that the team in the Theban Necropolis Preservation Initiative could be used by all of the missions, by the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, to record not only the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, although there's a vast amount more that desperately need to be recorded, but if there's a systematic way, in a few years' time, we can have achieved amazing things, wonderful things. Thank you.
One or two questions. You finished?
I finished 6
We
minutes.
have 6 minutes.
I hope Zah is proud of me.
Are there any questions?
My question has to do with the Getty project. You mentioned the fact that you were interested in the work procedures and the work methods and so forth. I'm wondering if you considered the fact that the paintings were done after the shrines were set up in the tomb. Because they were. Carter said also that he found splashes of yellow paint on the outermost shrine. And I would be very interested to know if there's been any work done on that. Thank you.
You know, I think Again, I'm not the best place to make hypotheses about why some of these things appear the way that they are. I mean, I don't know, Lori, if you'd like to answer this. Obviously, we have noted the anomalies in the stratigraphy. Yeah.
What about the paint on the shrine? That's important for the decoration of the tomb, isn't it?
Sorry.
Do you know?
Yeah, I can say
Here.
something. So, I mean, Jean Marie had mentioned that there were restorations that were done during the Pharaonic period. So I think that could be the explanation for why you're sometimes seeing paint on the objects. But we think that the tomb itself was already under construction, and that this was done, most of the painting was done prior to the objects being moved in. But probably because there were so many objects moved in that the walls were hit, there were losses that were made, and we do have evidence of retouching that was done probably after the objects were moved into the tomb. So I think that would be what we would propose.
I hope everyone has a chance to go to the room at the other end and experience the virtual reality, because I've been overhearing various comments. I mean, there's a little buzz of excitement, and really when you're inside it, when you're looking suddenly in the tomb, there's a point where you forget that you've got a headset on, and there's a little device where you can pick up a ball and you can remove the color. So you can see the tomb as it looks now. You can see the tomb only as a relief surface, and you can put the ball into a different point and you see the missing fragment that was mentioned. That we, again, it's a theme that's here. We recolorized the missing fragment, but the good news is we recolorized it based on the colors of the south wall. My interest actually with the missing fragment is whether it belongs to the left-hand side or whether it belongs as an extension of the bit of wall that's still there. Most Egyptologists put it closer to the wall, but it's got an end stop, so I'd love to know what happened on that south wall when the tomb was first sealed.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that session. Round of applause.